Hello, everyone. It's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and I'm joined by Alex, Vinnie, and Matt on this special episode of Development Hell Podcast. As we're going to be talking about Stanley Kubrick's Paths of Glory. And this film, after refusing to attack an enemy position, a general accuses the soldiers of cowardice, and their commanding officer must defend them, starring Kirk Douglas. So, we're going to be spending the episode chatting about this film. I'm going to let everybody kind of give their immediate thoughts, and you know what? Go from there. So, Alex, what are your main thoughts about Paths of Glory after watching this?
Thank you, Shane, and I'm grateful that we chose this film because I'm not a big fan of war movies, actually. And it's not that I don't enjoy war movies. I always enjoy watching them and take something away from them, but they typically don't appeal to me. It's not like when I'm scrolling through the channels or I'm looking what movie I'm going to go watch. It's not the first thing that really comes to mind. But I really enjoyed watching this, knowing that it was Stanley Kubrick. It was fun to watch because I hadn't seen a lot of his earlier films.
Mm-hmm.
I think they shot this in 57. It came out in 58, something like that.
I believe it came out, fact check Shane, came out in 1957.
Came out in 57? All right, thanks. Yeah, no, because I think I really I enjoyed the film, and in knowing that it was a Kubrick film, I was looking for that feel that a Stanley Kubrick film has, and I definitely see like seeds of it there. But there were also times, especially in the beginning, where it just felt like a regular film shot, in the late 50s. But what became apparent to me as the film was going on that it felt like, okay, this is definitely anti-war, and if it's not flat out anti-war in the dialogue and what I was taking away from it, it definitely felt like an anti-war film. And if it's not anti-war, it's most definitely highlighting hypocrisy, and it's most definitely highlighting some corruption there at that time in that specific war in France in World War One. And I really dug it. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the pace of it. It's only 90 something minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So usually your Kubrick films are these long, drawn out storytelling, which can be very captivating. But this one kind of doesn't really let you sit with any character or let you sit with any one scene for too long, which creates this spontaneity. And it's very, the film, even though it's a heavy subject matter, it's also very light on its feet, and it kind of I found that it was kind of coming at you very, very fast. And the best example of that being when Kirk Douglas is about to say, "Come on, we gotta go over." It's right when he's about to go up, one of his men's bodies just falls on top of him, and it's like, this isn't working. This wasn't a good idea, So it just kind of kept coming at me. So I enjoyed it. I didn't meditate on this one as long as I did with Barry Lyndon, but I definitely, I wrote down a couple of quotes, and look forward to seeing what the rest of you guys say, because I'm sure it'll access scenes that I really enjoyed while I was watching it.
Awesome, Alex. Vinny, what did you think?
I really liked it. As I told you guys earlier on before we started recording, this was one of like the few Kubrick movies that I had not seen yet. I did like it a lot. A couple things that Alex brought up. I do agree that this isn't a bad thing, but I do agree that how like it didn't really feel like a Stanley Kubrick movie. But I guess like since this was like still pretty early in his career, he was still like trying to like establish like this like the style that he would eventually solidify like later on in his career, like with movies like A Space Odyssey and A Clockwork Orange and all of those. But like there are a couple instances where it you can see like the hints of like what he would become, such as like the scenes when they're in the trenches and they have those long tracking shots. That's something that you would see later on. And they're also like the the big building they had their meetings in, the set, like the classical set design for that. It really did remind me a lot of like what you saw in Barry Lyndon, and then like at the end of A Space Odyssey when the main character is like in his bed, and like the the set design around him, it's like it has like a very I really don't know like any other term for it, but you guys know what I'm driving at. It's like a very like classical like a very classical like 18th century kind of look to it.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think what else there was.
Well, there's a lot of space in those scenes, and there's a high society kind of look.
That's it.
This privileged person, not in the trenches, has all this space to himself.
And then also back to the tracking shots, both within the trenches, and then the scene when they like go out into no man's land. You have a few like tracking shots there. I was wondering that. I wonder if Sam Mendes possibly took any inspiration from that when he was making 1917, because I definitely can see him referencing the camera work for that movie and using it for 1917. And also another thing, I gotta go back to what Alex was saying about the pace, like the pace of it, it really did catch me off guard, because like a lot of times when I think of a war movie, I think of battle scenes throughout its entirety. But I was actually surprised in like a good way from this movie, because really like we said, it's 90 minutes, and really like the whole like war aspect and on the battlefield, that's really like the first half hour, because like then after that you have a half hour of them like preparing for and then holding the trials, and then the last half hour is them being found guilty and waiting to have their sentence carried out. And can we do spoilers for this, or are we avoiding them? Because I was going to talk about the
spoiled the hell out of Barry Lyndon, so I think we could go about spoiling some things for the film. So if you haven't watched this and you don't want this film from decades and decades and decades ago being ruined for you, go watch it and come back. But otherwise, we're going to talk about it. So go ahead, Vinny.
All right. So just one last point about it. Like, like the ending really did hit me, because like for this type of movie, like you would you have like some expectation that, okay, yes, they are found guilty, they are getting ready to face the firing squad, but I think like Kirk Douglas, he's like a movie star, he's a protagonist, he's gonna find some way to get these three guys, he's gonna find some way to have people see the innocence of these three guys. But no, like that didn't happen. Like they get brought to the firing squad and are killed, and it really is like a hard hitting ending, and they really do draw out like their whole walk, their walk to the poles where they will be tied and like eventually shot at, and then once they reach like the spot where they're going to be shot at, again it's like minutes before, it's like another few minutes before it actually happens. So you really do experience like the weight of what they're experiencing, and they're like oh my gosh, like this is it, like I'm gonna be killed. And like it really, you really do like get the chance to like just sit there and have it and just take it in, and you're just you're just heartbroken the whole way through. It's really something. Well, and actually, like with it being a Kubrick movie, I guess you can't really expect a happy ending, because his movies don't really, he's not really known for his happy endings, but still, like it was it was a bit of a shock when they when they were actually killed at the end, and Kirk Douglas wasn't able to save them.
Well, and especially thinking of the context of a film coming out in 1957, it's not exactly a time period in cinema history where you would just go out there and be like, it'd be great. Let's throw this downer ending out at people. And I know, like, for us in 2021, talking about a Kubrick film, we're just like, exactly what you said, Vinny. It's like, it's a Kubrick film. We're not going into this movie expecting like happy endings and things to work out. And I guess that's honestly one of the biggest Kubrickian aspects of this film for me that you see is like, this isn't going to work out nicely. And I think that's definitely one of the things that he's putting into this film from his sensibilities, and maybe exactly why he picked the story to begin with. But how about you, Matt? What were your thoughts on the film?
Well, okay, so one thing when watching, so I've seen this movie before, but it's been like a long time, and I had never seen Barry Lyndon at all until like last month. So it was interesting to watch that movie. And there's like a line, I'm not gonna direct quote it, I didn't write it down, but basically, like the narrator says something like even though there are rulers and they have their time and they rise, then they die, and then they're replaced, like all that stuff is happening. There's that doesn't take away from the fact that like the thing that keeps it all together are all these people down here, and like in war, all these people like these people like they give up their lives, and they're sometimes like thankless, and like they're nameless, and like it sucks, and it just like that's just the way that things go. That's the way that it is. Watching that movie and then watching this movie, even though this one came before, it's interesting. I feel like I wonder why I wonder what he had like on a personal level, what Kubrick had on a personal level, and anybody else that was kind of like collaborating with him on this. Like, I don't know what they're trying to say about like people that are on top, and that like the people that are on the bottom, like their being on top comes at the expense of like hundreds and thousands of people. Like, I don't know. I have to wrestle with that more, because I haven't, kind of like Alex, I didn't like really like marinate on it as much as I did with the other movie. But I don't know. There's like something in there that like I really liked what he's trying to, or what he's like accomplishing and saying. I don't know. I like that. My only two things I put down on my post-it note, I said, so number one, I usually get like squeamish kind of when someone recommends me anything that's like before 1970, because my immediate thought is, okay, sure, okay, all right, pop 2 bags of popcorn, and hopefully the popcorn isn't the most fun thing in this experience. But like this was actually really awesome. I feel like this movie, even though it's black and white, so it's like double squeamish, right? Because it's like, damn, this has to be good. The tracking shots that Vinnie was talking about are really awesome. I love the fact that it's not just the fact that the camera is moving and like really, really fast. Like, it's not just moving, like it's not like the thing where it's like following the little boy in The Shining, like on a tricycle, and it's like like these are people, like crowds of people running at full speed up and down hills. That's awesome. They're doing all of that, and there's explosions happening like every like 30 seconds. Awesome. I like the fact also like it's real explosions. Like you actually see like the dirt like hitting people in the face, and like a couple of times, there's only one time, and it's not like a knock on the movie, it's human nature, where like one time there's like a dead body that like he like flinches when an explosion.
I saw that. Yeah.
You saw that?
Yeah.
I didn't notice that.
Like, oh wait, no, don't open your eyes. But no, the camera work is really awesome. But then so that's really cool. But then going back to the thing about the squeamish, it's definitely not boring, because like the violence in there, like there's like a lot of blood, and you would think that it's not, that wouldn't be like the case. You would think that like an older movie would kind of, I don't know, like you would see maybe like someone get hurt, but it's through like weird light tricks or something like that. Like, no, like you see like someone throw a grenade, and then like some time passes, and then you follow a character, see what happens to that person. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, no, that guy is on fire. Like that really like wow. So that's really awesome. And then the other thing on my poster is, wow, these people can really act. Like their line delivery is awesome. Like it's not only like the type of line delivery. I usually don't like when movies, unless it's really, really good, like Sorkin good, where it's like people don't talk like that in real life, but I really like what I'm hearing anyway. Like I love the fact that, I don't know, like just the way that they talked, like it never seemed like uninteresting, even if it was rapid fire and like all the word choices that they used had like multiple syllables. I don't know. It's not realistic, but it's hella entertaining. I don't know. I like that. So yeah. So those are my two things. It's not boring. It's super actiony, and it is and it's super dope. I feel like any actor would probably really like someone that like maybe like as a profession has to remember lines and wants to like express emotion, like screaming, but it's not hammy or awkward or weird. I don't know. I just like that. And I almost never really notice that usually in movies too, unless it's like really, really apparent. And like this inauthentic dialogue was incredibly entertaining to listen to. So yeah, that's my take.
And we have James who popped in here as well, and just in time for him to share his thoughts on the film.
Oh, cool. Are we doing 2 at a time, or can I do 3?
Well, so we're just kind of giving our basic thoughts here. So I think Matt was the only one that counted his out. So you're good to go.
Cool. So first impression, I couldn't help but think of like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. So like Matt said, actiony, and then really sharp contrast to like courtroom drama, and it's like just a mash of those two together. I found that interesting. I thought the movie aged really well. I thought the same thing about Strangelove, which I also watched this past month for the first time. I thought it aged really, really well, surprisingly. And on Matt's point about like movies before, take your pick. This is 58, right? So like a lot of movies from the 50s, they feel very slow. I didn't feel like this movie was slow at all. And it also felt, I guess my other takeaway was that it was very episodic. Like there are a couple scenes that I would love to talk about, like the execution scene, for example. My other favorite was the trench scene, where they're following Kirk Douglas through the trench, and they're just cranking up the tension before like all hell's about to break loose. And they go over the top, right? So I enjoyed the action stuff, and I enjoyed the courtroom drama stuff, but mostly I enjoyed the whole more than the sum of its parts, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
So, like, in terms of some of the main things that popped into my head, boy, is Kirk Douglas a movie star.
Yeah.
And there's something about him in terms of the fire that he brings to his acting. And I think this builds off of what Matt was saying. I felt like you could have given him anything to say, and he would have made it feel authentic and genuine. And all the way up until the end, when he's confronting this film reminds me a lot of Strangelove, which is interesting that you brought that up, James, because this film is obviously a drama, but there's definitely a dark humor to it that it's just like, for us looking in on it, it's just like, I want to laugh because how absurd it is, but then it's sad because how realistic it is. And basically that's the whole entire movie, Dr. Strangelove. It's just, this is too absurd for me to not laugh at, but so sad that this actually happens that it makes me sad thinking about it. And that moment towards the end of the film where Kirk Douglas's character is confronting the big guy in charge is like, oh, 3 is fine. We'll just go on with it. And just like, they're going to get executed. And he just like fires back at him, and you feel it. You feel every word that comes out of his mouth. And for me, I love cinematography and I love how the camera works and seeing how it captures a film. And Vinny, what you brought up in terms of 1917, that battle sequence felt obviously when they were doing the no man's land part in 1917, there weren't any people around. It's this them tracking through this like desolate wasteland of what happened before. But in this film, it's so amazing watching that camera move. And the one of the things that I learned from a video that I watched about how George Miller directs action is you have to have a focal point. You have to have a central focus. And that whole entire sequence, even how big it is, the explosions, hundreds of people running, extras flinching at explosions, and people getting hit with debris and tripping and falling and getting shot. You always see Douglas at the center of the frame, just following him as a focal point. And it's shot so well. And even before they even go off into the battle, that whole entire trench sequence of him, the camera following through the trenches, like those are the things that I'm like, this is a Kubrick film. I can see that. And it's this, we also brought this up earlier too, is like Vinny, when you're talking about the spatial kinds of things. And when we are in those offices that do feel like those big, ornate, elaborate rooms. So like say at the end of 2001, A Space Odyssey, you have these bigwig people sitting in these giant spaces. You feel the space. And Kubrick really knows how to capture it. And even in like the prisoner area, like the cells, just this open space, and it feels giant. And these men are just in there with desperation, hoping that somebody rides in and saves them at the end. But you don't get it because it's a Kubrick film. And there's definitely a through line with this, Strangelove, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Full Metal Jacket, and Barry Lyndon, of this idea that people are disposable. And yep. And you feel that so strongly in this film. And this, like, one of my favorite Metallica songs is Disposable Heroes. And that really captures the idea of back to the front.
I was born for dying.
Yep.
Right? Yeah, no, that same lyric went through my head during
And like that captures that same energy, because and what's so unnerving about the sequences when you have those higher ups, how casually they're just talking about, oh, 3's fine, right? We could kill 3 people. That'll be even, right? And you're just sitting there like, they're just talking so casually about murdering people. But it's okay. It's just 3 people. And they have this like chipper banter back and forth with each other, especially that one guy that's like in charge throughout the film. And it's just like this guy. And he really captures that thought of, it doesn't matter. They're a bunch of pawns. Who cares? And that's really sad.
The thing that it's funny, it's the same thing happened when we were watching Barry Lyndon, because there was like a theme that I just kind of noticed. And it's, from the very beginning, and it does, now you mention it, it does kind of remind me of Strangelove a little bit, in the interactions from character to character, the rank over reason, and every conversation I kept watching going into the first half hour, and then the next half hour, was that it was always rank over reason. And then it's the Kirk Douglas character that tries to flip that equation on its head. And it's like, well, you can't do that. You can't question an officer. So it was, I found that to be, I think it's in that element and in those interactions that, now that I think about it, there is a kind of a satirical element to the film. And you guys talk about, like Strangelove, there's a lot of permission to laugh because it's so absurd, like this one, I think maybe if you watch it again, I didn't laugh very much, but maybe if I watched it again, I like to laugh a little bit, but if you watch it again, maybe you'll give yourself a little bit more permission to laugh at it, maybe because you'll be able to kind of see that satire a little bit more.
Yeah, I didn't laugh either, but I mean I hated that general, the one who was Kirk Douglas's immediate superior.
Mhm.
Mostly I just like he was so repellent as a character.
Yeah, and what's so interesting, and I don't know if this was the actor that played it. I don't know if that was a real scar he had on his face, the general. But this is not somebody that was telling me this is not somebody who hasn't experienced war as a private himself. This is not somebody who hasn't been on a battlefield himself. He is just so immersed into this idea of his rank and the power that he has to give this order, and the promotion. You texted me, you said the promotion, he's going to get a promotion because of this.
Mhm.
50% will die, but 25% will make the hill, and 25% of those, they'll all die, but then we'll have 25% left to stay on the hill.
It's that absurdity of everything, and that's because there are the two, because you have the corporal and then the actual general who's played by Adolf Menho, who's like the one with the mustache. He's the one that just speaks so casually about it, and he's like, oh, okay. And it's just like, you can tell he either hasn't been in that place or it's been so long.
What that reminds me of, Shane, and that character reminded me of, and I know much less historically, especially if you're a history person, much less historically accurate movie is Braveheart. The king, when they're on the battlefield, and he's like, well, we're going to hit our own men. And he goes, yes, we'll hit theirs as well. Like it's that same sort of...
Long
Mel Gibson has admitted that Spartacus is like one of his favorite movies. He was definitely influenced by Kubrick, for sure.
For sure.
Yeah. You can tell, like, obviously it's not like a remake of Spartacus, but there is definitely some influences on like the legend of William Wallace that they portray in that film, and just from like the scale of the battling and everything just feels that way. But yeah, that's interesting talking about Longshanks in Braveheart. It's like, it's that same idea where it's like so disconnected. They are pawns. And this film definitely captures it. And what I love so much about the very end, because if we think about this, it's like, because obviously some wars feel a lot more morally important. So like World War II, I think they make so many films about, because it's like, it's good versus evil. But what's World War One?
I remember, I wish I could tell you who the quote was from, but somebody had asked a historian why World War II is so big in, like, especially American culture.
Mm-hmm.
And we forget about World War One. And the answer was that it's got bigger explosions and better villains. And it's true.
Because like basically all the rulers were related to each other in World War One, and it's just a bunch of nonsense. It's, why did we fight this war? And this film really captures it, because like at the very end, when they're in that bar and they don't want to hear this woman sing, they're like, ah, they start singing, and then they all start singing along, and you're just like, we're all just people. We're all sitting there singing along and joining together because we're just human. And when it really comes down to it, what's the difference? Why are we fighting each other? And then the worst part is they're just whisked right back off to the front, because it just kept going.
Well, concerning like the movie's approach to like the whole like absurdity of war, just like one little thing I want to point out is just how, like, one interesting way how I think they showed that was just like going back to like the use of like giant like open spaces in this movie. Like, I like the whole juxtaposition of like the you know, like you have like the big open spaces of like the carnage of like the battlefield where as you say like the pawns are out fighting the war, but then you have the indoor scenes and like these other giants in like these giant open spaces indoors where like the higher ups are nice and safe. They're like nice and safe and get to have their own discussions as to how they're as to like they're like how they're gonna plan out their next movement. So like you just have like, you know, the whole contrast of like just like the average soldiers being out in the open trenches, but then you have the higher ups and like these like open like nicely decorated areas where were like, yeah, they discuss the war, but at the same time it's almost like the way they carry on with their conversations, it's like they almost don't have a care in the world because they're like, hey, it's not my life that's gonna be like out in the trenches. Like I'm safe in here. Like I can just relax and not have to worry about being like mowed down by a bullet.
And that was
I like the fact that like in the very beginning when you meet Douglas' character, he corrects someone when someone says something about the fact that like they talk about German soldiers as if like they were animals or something like that, and he corrects them and says like, no, like those are people. And I like the fact that that isn't just like a random like one-off line that sounds cool, but that's like a theme for his whole character and how much of a contrast his views are compared to like that guy in particular, because that guy was the guy that kind of like is like self-centered and stuff, and I think that's the same guy that has to Douglas makes I don't know, orchestrate the whole like the death squad thing at the end. But I don't know, I really liked the fact that even if there's two sides of opinion at conflict, there should also be some level of attempt for them to understand the other point of view, or at least to like respect them as like humans. Like if you do that, then it's almost kind of like then you've already lost. You know, I don't know. I really like that. Also, Shane, earlier you said something about action having a focal point.
Mm-hmm.
I liked that because something else in the movie was really cool is when you saw like just like in the background, you see like a lot of dead bodies. Like not so much in the beginning, but like as the movie goes on, like you see there's a lot of people just laying on the ground. And that's before when they're like storming it. It's just people just laying, or you'll see just like a crowd of people that are just bleeding and bandaged up. And it's like for no reason in particular, a whole conversation is happening right here, but then like these people are just talking or just moving in the background. I don't know. That's really cool too. It says, I don't know how many movies had he made before this one?
Like 3, I think.
3? Okay.
Three feature-length films.
Yeah, super dope. Yeah.
And this definitely seems like the biggest scale film up to this point. And I know like he had a very strong Kubrick got a big break being connected with Kirk Douglas because of this, and then Douglas getting him on Spartacus, which Spartacus is definitely his most mainstream film. It definitely feels like a studio film. And after watching it, like it definitely feels the least Kubrick-y film that I've seen of his. And it makes sense. It is a big studio film, and it's definitely Kirk Douglas's film. And then Strangelove happens and Lolita, and then it just exponentially grows to like 2000. I think 2001 The Space Odyssey is just like there's no turning back from here. Like he is Kubrick through and through, and those films just become that from that moving forward. But it's interesting watching this film and having a much more intimate feel, because I guess here's a question. How often do we get a fiery, passionate, and empathetic lead in a Kubrick film?
Not often. Not now that I think of it.
Not really.
Right.
And Kirk Douglas is like, and it's interesting because yeah, he worked with Jack Nicholson, he worked with Tom Cruise. He doesn't work with big stars a whole lot in his films. Because like think about it, how many actors are mainstream names from 2001: A Space Odyssey?
I didn't recognize anybody.
No.
Not really. But like this is definitely one of the most genuine and empathetic and passionate leads in a film of his. And you could tell Kirk, like, you know why Kirk Douglas was such a star.
Oh yeah, I mean he seems like he's the most enlightened person, you know, in the entire film. And you know, Matt, I mean, you're talking about I don't know, because I was reading something on leadership. You're talking about integrative thinking, you know, and that's this character has the ability to think critically. He seems to even though he has the respect. I should gotta be careful when I say this. I don't think he has the respect of all of his men, but he certainly cares more about his men than you know, the people above him do, because he's so close to the war. He's close to the victory. He's close to the loss of life. He's close to the injured. He's close enough to everything that's going on and still be in an authority role and still have some power. I wrote down one quote I wanted to mention was when he said, and he didn't just act like a movie star. Kubrick shot him like a movie star in this scene. I think like the camera was like below the people's knees. So he just looks like a giant when he delivers that speech. And he says, "There are times when I'm ashamed to be a member of the human race, and this is one such time." And I went, yes! I was so excited to hear him say that. And my grandfather, God rest his soul, would have applauded the same way. He would have loved that line. Because I think that the systems in place and the authority in place were just, you know, in this case, you know, they're working against their own men, you know, and he highlighted that, you know, in the trial, because even in the trial it was rank over reason. It was one thing or another. There was no room for critical thinking in that trial, and he's working his ass off to try and move critical thinking and integrative thinking and reason into these people's judgment, you know. So that
prosecutor was awful. Hated him. Hated him. So slimy. The lawyer opposite him,
that's right.
so slimy.
Correct me if I'm wrong, isn't that the same guy? He went to the battleground, I think, or maybe he just looked like him, and he forgot to salute Kirk Douglas. He turned his back on him, and he's like, "Oh yeah, by the way," like, you know, I don't know if you remember that. I think it was the same guy, and that's why I thought that was kind of a foreshadowing. He turns around and says, "Oh yeah, my bad." Like, you know, he then he remembers to salute him. I just thought that movement was like, there's obviously a lack of respect and a lack of awareness here about these two characters. And because this person prosecuting, he doesn't have to do a damn thing. He doesn't have to lift up a gun. We don't see him lift up a gun. You know, he's just passing judgment.
I think thinking about the greater context of the film and how Douglas's character works and why this is so timeless is because as the audience, we're him. And when he lashes out at the end, just so frustrated about this, we're all sitting there watching this film being like, this is ridiculous. And we want to be there to yell in these people's faces. How can you be so calm and cold and just matter of fact about all this? And it's so interesting, Alex, that you keep bringing up the integrated thinking, the critical thinking. Military doesn't work with that. That you have to follow orders. And that's why this is so black. They see it so black and white is you didn't follow an order, you get executed for it. And Douglas's character sees the gray of like, what, like they weren't cowards. There's someone not understanding why I'm going out and throwing my life away for this. And us being able to look and see that and understand that, there is no thinking like that above Douglas's character. And that's probably one of the reasons why he isn't higher, because he cares more about his men and their lives and making the right decision in terms of a moral standpoint instead of what strategically is going to be the best decision. Because the thing is, it's like, from a military standpoint, if these men aren't going to follow orders and do what they need to do, then we're not going to win this war. So we need to show a message. And that's the thinking, that very black and white that's going on above him, and why it's so frustrating, because we're all sitting there watching this film thinking, this is wrong. Like, what did these men do to deserve to be killed just for that? And that's why it's so infuriating. And you could just feel the tension and the fire boiling under Douglas throughout this film, and why it's so cathartic at the end when he yells and just rips into his superior, that general. And what the film shows us is, doesn't make a difference. And I think it's that bleakness at the end, like the insanity of war. And why are we doing this? And why is this happening? But it is happening, so you got to do what you're supposed to do. There's no thinking, just doing. And I think this film really captures that mentality and shows the hypocrisy of it, or the just why it makes no sense. But there is this film, it's definitely not as overtly satirical as Strangelove, but there is a level of this is absurd. And like, I can't help but, because and that's interesting, because some of you mentioned this is your first time watching this. And Alex, you brought up, maybe next time I watch this, I give myself more permission to laugh at this. I've seen this a couple of times. And at this point, I'm sitting there listening to those scenes and knowing how biting what that dialogue is supposed to really be saying, is that underneath that, these generals are saying these absurd things, and we know how absurd it is. And yet they're still going to do it anyway. And nobody really can tell them no. And that's where it balances that this is darkly funny and also really sad and frustrating. But I guess one of the big things we really haven't talked about at this point, which I think is one of the most, I think the hardest stretch of the film to get through, is after they're sentenced and going into them being executed. Mm-hmm. Because what do they have to do to one of the prisoners to even get them ready to be executed?
They had to prop him up. They had to crucify him, basically. They had to prop him up because he was knocked out cold. Yeah, I would love to talk about this, because it's, I don't know, it's almost bizarre. Mm-hmm. And marked how differently all three of those men react to their situation, you know?
Yeah, because what's interesting, and I think this is, if I remember correctly, which one this was. So Joe Turkel, the actor who, interesting enough, is the bartender in The Shining, and Terrell from Blade Runner, is one of the soldiers that gets executed at the end. And correct me if I'm wrong, is he the one that winds up being like, he's dying?
Yes.
And they still prop him up so that they could execute him.
Mm-hmm.
And pinch his cheek too.
Pinch his cheek, and to get him to wake up. Yeah.
And at that point, it's like, what's the point? Sure. Like, he's obviously gonna die. Yeah, but you know what? You have to do it.
Right. That scene, and I look forward, because I know, Jim, I know you mentioned something about, I look forward to hearing what you say about what that means, about the contrast between those three. But I love the scene when they're in the cell together and the priest is there, and one of them gives confession, and then the other one, is like, I don't believe in God, and then he's got this great line, because he's just drinking, and he tells up the drink. He says, "This is my God." He says, there's a cafe in his town that says, "Do not be afraid to ask for credit, for a way of refusing is very polite." I'm not exactly sure what he meant by that, but that led to him, he was just like lashing out, for being in that situation. I'm not exactly sure what all of that meant, but he was throwing that in the priest's face, and back to that idea of rank over reason that kind of kept replaying in my head. It's like, oh, here's somebody with the ultimate rank. If you want to get cynical, or if you're not just being cynical, if you're just kind of looking at this saying, this guy is going to come in and everyone's going to give their confession, and here's this man, he's questioning God, the ultimate rank that there is to question.
Oh, that's a good point. That's deep, man. I didn't even get that far.
Yeah, you don't question God. You don't question God. And he's saying, salvation. What? What's salvation? He's risking his life, putting his life on the line for his country, and this is all you have to give to me. I have to get on my knees and say a prayer. Is this it? And so, and they all three of them react very differently, to that. And what ends up happening to him, he ends up getting, a major concussion knocked on his head. I think his head hits the concrete wall after the other guy punches him in the face.
So did you see that as like an act of God? Is that how you read that scene?
Metaphorically, yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's almost like, I remember my grandma Jean used to say to me, see, that's God punishing you. If I like hit my ears, after I said a curse word or something. That's, I did kind of view it that way. Yeah.
So that was Arnaud. Yeah. I'm looking at the actors' names here.
Mm-hmm.
You said it was Joe Turkel or Turkel?
Turkel.
And then
but yeah,
the big guy.
Yeah, I remember him.
Gary. Yeah.
I remember him very, very well, because I'm like, wait a minute. It was one of those things, because like, that's the thing about Kubrick, just on a side note, is there's really small actors that'll pop up in a whole bunch of different roles in his films. Like the same actor plays Alex's dad in A Clockwork Orange, who then plays like the lawyer at the very end of Barry Lyndon. He doesn't even have any lines, I don't think, who's just sitting there writing, like with Lady Lyndon writing the checks and stuff like that. And then he's Grady, in The Shining, in that crazy red bathroom, and has that moment with Jack Torrance. He's like, "You've always been here, Mr. Torrance." And like, that's the same actor in all those different roles. And like, Joe Turkel's like not a big actor, but he's memorable, and he has a very memorable face. He has a very memorable voice, and that's why he stuck out so much to me watching this film. Is just like, I felt like that was very much on purpose. But yeah, go ahead. I interrupted you.
No, I don't think you did. I was just trying to give the guys, names. We're talking about how it's like there's no humanity to these guys, and I can't even remember their names,
Mm-hmm.
But I know Vinnie and Matt didn't have too much time left with us. Do you guys want to share anything about that that scene, like before you guys have to sign off?
Vinnie, you want to go first?
I got to think about it for a few minutes. So Matt, if you know what you're gonna say, then you go before me.
Okay, yeah, like all of my. You're asking about all my thoughts about the I guess like the death, the last bit of it, basically.
Yeah, about like the condemned men, I guess.
Well, it was very interesting. Like, I'm kind of curious when they were like making this movie, and like, okay, so you want me just to cry the whole march down, like people either side. You want me just to be like clinging on to the priest. You want me just to bawl the whole way down, and then while I'm also being tied up, and then while I'm also being blindfolded, like just the whole way. Like, that was an interesting choice, and it made that choice, it worked in the sense that it made, like, it was hard to watch. It was incredibly hard to watch because he's crying and he's like inconsolable, and And so this is like the second time I'm watching the movie. So kind of like what Shane was saying before, like, you know what's going to happen. Like all this stuff, like there isn't like some kind of like random miracle, or no one's gonna like, I don't know, like step in front or anything like that. Like he's crying because he's about to die, and he's saying he doesn't want to die, and then he actually does die. And that's just, yeah, I don't know. The whole thing was just really powerful. I think it was really sad, and I don't know. That was just great. That was great the whole way through, the whole thing. I also like, I feel like this movie has like a lot of extras too. Like how many people were, like so many people.
That's the tricky thing about filmmaking back then. There's no let's CGI Wembley Stadium
Yeah.
in Bohemian Rhapsody. No, it's like, no, you gotta fill out this, like all these people. And that's an interesting thought too, Matt, about like watching this. There's no like Douglas Ex Machina to come like flying in and Kirk Douglas saves the day at the end. It's like, nope, you are there watching this slowly play out, and you're just like, are they gonna do this? Can they really be doing this? And like you have the man who's crying, and I keep bringing it back up, but like the part that always hits me, it's like, dude is dying. And like Alex even brought up there, like, wake up. Like it's like, wake up, time to die. And it's just like, what is the point? And you're sitting there just watching this absurdity and this ridiculousness play out, and us as the audience are being forced to watch this because you're like, this happens.
But it's realistic that they all die. And I mean, it's sad and I don't want them to, but it's realistic in the sense that like, that happens, maybe not in that way, but like people die because of the decisions of other people in suits. It is what it is. But and it sucks, and it shouldn't be that way. But also, like, it kind of goes within the theme of the thing that I just said. Not only that happens in real life, but also happens in like the movie, like politics. Like you are at the mercy of so many things that are not within your control, and your life is kind of like in the balance of that, like literally. And I feel like if something were to have happened, like, I don't know, like a lightning strike, or I don't know, someone, I don't know, raises their hands and the ground starts trembling, which would be awesome. Hope deleted scene maybe, I don't know, but but like I feel like that would kind of make the movie's point, at least the point that I got out of it, it would make the movie kind of like less impactful. Because like, no, like these people, like if you're gonna say that people have to die for other people, then that should be the whole way through, and that sucks. And I hated watching it, but it was a good scene. It was a really good scene. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. This film wouldn't have worked if somebody saved them at the end. Like how this is all set up, this would not be the film that they were trying to make if that happened. Vinny, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that, before I head out, like I said before about the rest of the movie, with how well it's paced, like the first 2/3, they play out like slow and effectively to get us to like understand like really what's going on. And like, the same can be said for the final third, which is where I really appreciated it the most, because you really do go on this like emotional journey with these three characters, because like in the beginning of the sequence, yeah, like they're condemned to death, but like they're more relaxed about it, because I guess like they figure, oh, like something will happen and we'll be found innocent. But then as you creep closer towards the end, like they really go through an emotional crisis where they realize, all right, time is running out. I don't think anybody is coming here to save us. And then once you do get to that final walk to where they're gonna die, that takes a few minutes, and you really understand like the gravity of that situation. And just one last point, like one reason why the way it's like slowly drawn out is so effective is because once they get shot, like there's no like big like emotional scene after like you know in that same area like where they are like what like once they get shot, the camera lingers on them for like maybe 1 or 2 seconds, and then it just transitions right back to the higher ups and their like meeting area, and like just like the way how the way how it doesn't linger and it just transitions right away to the next scene. Like it really does. It really does give you the feel. It really lets you feel what the higher ups are feeling. It's like, you know, because like what they're feeling is that, okay, you know, they're shot. All right. So you know what, they were shot. They were shot. Back to, you know, back to business. So let's not focus on them. Let's focus on moving forward. So and that's what the movie does with the way it edits between the scenes. Like it just, you know, it just lingers on them for a couple seconds once they die, and then it just moves on as if their lives didn't matter. And that's the thing. Like to the higher ups, the lives of these 3 soldiers didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. Like they were just, you know, as we've said in the beginning, like they were just pawns.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think World War I was a great setting for this story to be told, because the way men were, and I think they even talk about this in the first few lines of the movie. They try to set up like there was a stalemate and the front was established here, and the French lines are here and the German lines are here, and they don't move, but men are still dying by tens and hundreds of thousands for no gain of territory whatsoever, right? And most of them don't have a real reason to be dying except for chauvinism, just like blind patriotism, right? I have a theory about these 3 guys, which is I'm steering the conversation. I would love for you guys to stick around, but if you can, I get it. I think it hit me first when the guy was like, because I'm watching this movie with my parents, and they're skeptical of Kubrick because of his very countercultural work that follows this, right? And the one guy says, the one whose name I can't remember, he says, I haven't thought about sex for, do you guys remember that? He's like, I haven't thought about sex like all day or something like that. And I was like, that's such a strange thing to say. Like, why would you say it? So I have a theory here. I'm just going to read you what I wrote on my Post-it, right? So I think Ferrall, the big guy, he represents the id, which is primitive and sexual. Maybe I'm editorializing here a little bit to make my theory work. But then the guy whose name I can't remember is the ego. He's kind of the realist between the 2 extremes, yeah. And then the other one, Joe, what's his name again?
Charcoal.
Yeah.
Turkle.
He would be Turkel, the super ego, right? The moral conscience. Because all of a sudden the movie's like all about these questions about sex and God, and the way Ferrall like ripped into the duck and the other guy didn't want to eat it, and the other one's like mediating between the 2. But the bigger question would be why? Like, did Kubrick have a bigger idea there that I'm not latching onto? Or like, is that a sufficient explanation for why the 3 men were acting so oddly, I thought. But that's my theory. I'm sorry to be constantly bringing up Freud. I think I did this last time.
Yeah, that's what happened last time. Well, which one kills the roach? Which one of the guys killed the roach?
I don't remember.
Was it the taller one?
It was the guy that was eating.
That's right, because he was the one sitting down, and he was eating, and then he slams his hand down and crushes the roach.
That's right, and the scene ends, right? He ends the scene with killing the roach.
Which one was that? Was that the kind of the big, you know, droopy-eyed looking one?
Yeah.
Okay. So are you saying like that's something a kid would do? Well, actually, I've seen grown men kill roaches, so I don't know if that works.
Because, like, I wouldn't put anything past
Yeah,
Kubrick putting anything of that sort into any of his movies.
sure. But it's the way they react. It's the way they react that you can, in that framework of id, ego, and superego.
So for
I
all,
really-
he's the big, dumb, animalistic one, right? So he wouldn't have a second thought to killing the roach. But the other guy didn't want him to.
Right. Right.
All right,
Just
guys.
another
I actually have to get going, but I look forward to, but I'll like probably tonight I'll send my picks for the next episode, and then yeah, I look forward to next month's episode.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right,
Same guys.
take it easy, guys.
See you, Matt.
Yeah. Like, oh, I'll say one thing. If the Freud thing is true, I really like that because ego and super ego, like in some ways, one of the points with that is the fact that on some level, everybody kind of leans towards one or the other. And if that's the case, then because in any other movie, right, because those characters, like your three men, like those characters aren't like this giant focal point in the beginning of the movie. Like they get like all this characterization and stuff. Like you start following them like way later in the movie. Any other movie would have not done that. It would have been the trial, and then it would have been the execution, and then kind of like, and that's really it. Like you getting like them talking to the priest and them talking to each other and them fighting and them crying and them like whatever, like that was really interesting. If you want to, like, if the people that made the movie wanted like, hey, to get anybody, every single person, if the choices are one of three, your base impulses, I have to follow societal norms, or I have to kind of like listen to my own like self-comfort, like you have to be able to identify with at least one of those people on a very deep level. And that's really dope. And this is the second time you've like made a really good theory that I really need Shane to edit. Or, like, can you just make that? Can you like change the voice or something, make it sound like I said? I feel like that might be necessary. That's the second week in a row. Second time in a row. All right, but guys, I'll talk to you later. Okay.
See you, Matt.
All right, Matt.
Take care, Matt. Be well.
Which I think what's interesting about that theory is because those three men are a representation of humanity.
They
And
are
like
they're chosen to represent the troops who represent the country, who represent humanity, right?
because it came down to they weren't going to execute this whole entire platoon, whatever you want to call it, of troops. They decided on three people. Why? Three sounds good. And I think that's also the absurdity of it. How did you figure out killing three people would make this perfectly okay? But those three people, I would think that there was a reason why it was three people, not from like the general's perspective, but from a writing perspective, why it's three people. And it's an interesting way of putting that because it does show the different aspects of how like a human being could react to a situation like this. And especially in that time period, because like I don't know if a whole lot of people put a whole lot of truth into what Freud came up with still today. But I feel like in the 50s, and of course it's Stanley Kubrick here, this is the man who made a spaceship the shape of a giant sperm. Like there's some stuff going on a certain level here. And it's so interesting putting in some context because this weekend, as we're filming this, I watched Wrath of Khan for the first time.
Hey, so did I. And I'm not sure if that's my fault or not. Sorry.
Wait, what?
I cheated and watched a couple of Star Trek movies on your app.
No, that's okay. No, because I'm going through the Cinephiles, and great podcast. So if you haven't listened to the Cinephiles, listen to it. And I've been putting all the movies that I haven't seen that they've talked about on my watch list, and just picked that off my watch list this weekend. So it's just random. But like obviously one of the main focal points of Star Trek is supposed to be that idea. Because you have Kirk, Spock, and McCoy representing those pieces. And because like Bones is like he's the id. He's all about, it's like he's the emotional one. And of course, Spock is the super rational one to everything, and Kirk somewhere in between. Which, to be perfectly honest, I'm not a huge Star Trek fan, so like, I'm like, The Wrath of Khan was the first traditional Star Trek film I watched. I've only seen the J.J. Abrams era ones, so don't get mad at me, people listening to this.
Same here.
Like, it was interesting watching that for the first time because, like, from the outside looking in, William Shatner seemed totally like he was going to be the guy that's just like off the cuff and stuff like that. So it was a bit interesting watching that. But like, that was a big idea incorporated into things. Like, one of my favorite science fiction films, Forbidden Planet. This is like really like old school 50s science fiction. It had Leslie Nielsen in it as a serious actor before he was in Airplane, and then you couldn't take him seriously anymore.
Yeah.
But, which is funny because he was super serious. The whole rest of the movie around him played him for laughs. But the film, it's very overt, talking like literally the antagonist of the film is the monster from the id. And so like it's very much like somebody liked some Freud writing this, and I wouldn't be surprised if that theory was accurate, and it makes sense in the way that those characters were portrayed in Paths of Glory. And I think it would make sense because there are representation of regular people, and they're specifically representing what would a human being do in this situation. And yeah.
Well, that's sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off, Shane.
No, I'm good.
No, I definitely find that's really interesting. And you made me think about the Kirk Douglas character. One things I couldn't help but thinking about. I mean, I'm not to play slight devil's advocate here. How many guys did they want to execute at the start? Wasn't it like a third of the platoon?
Did they start the whole platoon?
Yeah, maybe he wanted to kill everybody. He was willing to sacrifice 65% if he was going to get the anthill, and he didn't get the anthill. So now he wanted them all dead, dude.
And so and psychologically, this is a bit of a mind shakeup, because in that negotiation Kirk Douglas has with them, it starts with like all of them, and then like a third of them, and then like I don't know, it was like, and then he was able to compromise it down to 3. And at this point, and I'm just being honest here, there's a thing that happens. There's a group think that happens, and this is where it gets scary with human behavior, because I think a lot of human beings on the Zoom call, a lot of human beings out there in the ether would go, oh, well, at least they got it down to 3. Da, 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 you know.
And how like, not to quote a meme here, but like, I know like the after Avengers Endgame and that Hulk meme, Kevin was like, I see this as an absolute win. Like how General Brillard, the mustached guy, reacts. It's like, oh, it's 3. Yeah. Okay. And it's just like, that's a good thing. Like sitting here like, oh, okay. I guess I'm okay with that. And I was actually going to read a quote, and I'm going to read it now because I feel like this fits really well into the context of that conversation about they all kind of just went with it at that point. And my favorite piece of this film is when Colonel Dax finally shoots back at the very end, and Kirk Douglas, he's like, you could see building anger. He's like, I apologize for not being entirely honest with you. I apologize for not revealing my true feelings. I apologize, sir, for not telling you sooner that you're a degenerate, sadistic old man. And you can go to hell before I apologize to you now or ever again. And
feels so good.
When he shot that back, it's the exact thing. He's like, he's apologizing because Kirk Douglas, his character, knows he should not have went along with any of this.
Right.
And he's guilty. And Like
Yeah.
he's apologizing for not saying this sooner.
Right.
And then the general's response back to put it's a whole paragraph, but one part that really sticks out to me, it's like, you're an idealist, and I pity you as I would the village idiot.
I forgot about that. That was
And he just so plainly says that and acting like, oh, that's cute, and dismisses him. And no matter how fiery Douglas came back at him, he just brushes it off, because what's Douglas going to do to him? He can't do anything to him, and he could have Douglas killed too,
Yeah.
in actuality. And that's one of the dark, bleak aspects of this film, is like, in the end, what could you have done about this? And because it was a monkey trial, like that was not going to, no matter what Douglas did, he wasn't going to be convincing anybody that they shouldn't have been executed.
Yeah.
And in the end, like going back to that conversation, that groupthink earlier, is just like, I feel like so much of this film is Douglas's character, Dax, trying to get to the point where he can really stand up and be the person he wants to be, even in the face of it's going to happen anyway. But at least he is going to take the moral high ground and not just keep going along with this madness.
But he is still part of it, isn't he?
Yep. And that's the really sad part at the very end of the film, when they all start singing together and showing humanity and connecting on a human level. And then bam, where do they go next? Back to the front. And it's all still part of the game.
I feel like I like the Kirk Douglas character. I don't think, unlike some of the other Kubrick characters that come later, there is something admirable about him. I don't think he's leaving empty-handed. Obviously, if you're a movie star like Kirk Douglas was, you've got to have that moral heroic thing about you, in most, especially I'm sure at that time, it's hard to be the bad guy. It's hard to be the heavy and be the movie star all the time, unless you're like freaking Angels with Dirty Faces. What's his name? James Cagney or something like that. But so I like that. But no, I think when you get into anything like this, when you're in that type of position, you are part of it. You are part of the system, and in that case, I mean, his job is to lead men into a situation where they have to kill or be killed, and he's part of that. And it's there's I don't know. I feel, and you can agree or disagree if you want, I feel like he does the best he can. I feel like he's doing what he can.
I think by the end, after he lashes back out at the general, I think he as a person has reached the point where, what can I do about this? At least I tried to make a stand with defending those three men in the face of like, he's going to fail. And I feel like he won a moral victory, at least on a personal level. But in the end, it's still disappointing, because what difference did he make?
Right. Just a personal, not necessarily an actual victory. So there's a selfish aspect to what he's doing,
Yes, I guess. On a practical level, did they talk about him being drafted? Like, because they did say he was a lawyer before the war, right? So he's he's an outsider. He's not a career military man like these other officers.
And I think you could tell.
Yeah, for sure. But what would happen to him if he quit? Would that be a selfish decision? If he quit, if he resigned his post, is he abandoning all of those men who he's responsible for?
I think by the end, his perspective, I think he would be, which is why I guess he still stays. And he goes back to the front with them.
Yes, right. Yeah.
Because the thing is, I guess what would have been worse is if he abandoned them and let somebody else, more like who he answers to, take over the platoon. Because at least he can be there and do what he can and stand up for what he can do. Because, like, in the moment, obviously it didn't work out for 3 of those men, but in the moment, that platoon didn't die because they made a choice.
But if they had followed him onto that battlefield, they might have gotten wiped out anyway, right? So,
well, I think most of them survived, like, to live longer because they did not follow his orders at that point. And that's why this film's so challenging, because like 3 men died, but how many more men would have died if they did go along with it? And is it right that those 3 men died for the rest of them to live? And I feel like if you want to, I think you can dig real deep into like thinking about that kind of perspective. And this film puts that in your face. It makes you think about that.
This is there. I was trying to read some review. This is based on some historical fact. Was it not? Do you guys know if this is based on like a single event, or if this is just kind of like a composite thing?
Because this is based on a novel.
Oh, a novel.
By Humphrey Cobb. Which, that's the interesting thing. A lot of Kubrick's films are adaptations, which I find very interesting. But I don't know if Cobb's novel was based off of like historical accounts, or if this is because like and to be honest, I don't know how accurate of an adaptation this was from that novel, because knowing Kubrick, I feel like Kubrick was the kind of writer and creator that saw an idea, took it, and just completely made it his own. Because except for maybe A Clockwork Orange, I feel like most of his adaptations deviate quite a bit from what actually was going on in the novel. But I don't know. And I don't know if this is based off of an event that actually happened, or if this was just...
Yeah. I know that what I read in the review, they wouldn't show the film in Belgium. They wouldn't, I don't know about France, but they wouldn't, for some reason, Belgium didn't want to show the film. I'm not sure how controversial it was at the time. I mean, this was 30 years removed from World War I, but there was some controversy.
40? Yeah, like this came out almost 40 years since the end of World War I. But like, I'm not surprised this movie had some backlash, because like it doesn't exactly paint a military very kindly.
Right.
And especially, and if you think about it, this was made less than 15 years after World War II. The world had literally just been through these 2 giant wars. And if you think about it, most World War II films after this are very positive and showing what a moral victory we took on to do that. This is a very bleak, and I don't know how many films up to this point challenged World War I for what it was, which was devoid of morality. It's just, I don't like, basically bunch of people died because a bunch of relatives and very rich and powerful people were just pissed off at each other. And they used this guy was assassinated, World War, and let's jump into it. And why did it happen? Why did it have to happen? Yeah. And I love that quote, James, that you brought up earlier from whoever that was from, because like, yeah, World War II had better villains, because what's Lord of the Rings based off of? World War II. Sauron is the Hitler. And that's where that came from, that evil. What was the evil people were fighting in World War I?
Nobody really knew. There's a political cartoon that I really like. You guys probably saw it in high school at some point. There's like, it's all, each country involved in the conflict is represented by a black and white man, but they're basically just following each other into war because this one's bullying that one. So he says, oh, don't pick on my friend. And he calls in his ally and he's like, well, you can't talk to him that way. And they're just kind of lining up, in this. Apparently not everybody thought it was going to happen, which is why Germany gets a lot of the blame for the war because they kind of made the first big moves. But yeah, it's for the common soldier, like you're just doing your job. You're just doing your duty. There is no time to stop and think about the right and the wrong of it. You know what I mean?
And Kubrick takes the time to look at exactly that in this film and the games that were played. And I feel like that's what, like, if I like this and Strangelove are definitely his most biting films. Because and I guess maybe Full Metal Jacket. Well, and what do they all deal with? Yeah. Military, government power, and
sure.
Because a lot of the other of his films are very surreal and thematic and broad. These are probably the most to the point that you can see what they're going at in terms of themes, in terms of war and why are we doing this. And like Strangelove is just so ridiculous that you could write it off. It's like, I feel like a lot of people who might watch that who aren't realizing the satire going on. It's like, oh, this is too absurd to happen. And then you live in 2021. You're like, my God, this totally would happen. But like this feels very realistic and hard to process. And I think because how gray this film is and not acknowledging the fact that this is a black and white film, but like, there's like, this isn't, we're off to war. And because like, imagine this story in a World War II context, if people, they didn't go out and fight and they were charged with cowardice, and like, you're letting Hitler continue to like mass murder people because you were a coward. Here, you're a coward. You didn't fight for what? What is that? What are they fighting for? And I think that's what makes this so much more interesting in where this is set, because I think that's the point of the film is really, why should they die for this?
Yeah. I'm glad you guys bring up that book because I didn't know about this novel, Paths of Glory. Like when I think of World War I, it's always all quiet on the Western Front, which was super subversive in its own way. But the protagonist of that story is just an ant, just a common soldier, right? This is different because we get a hero, we get a Kirk Douglas, we have a leading man, who's kind of caught in the middle. So Kubrick's twisting a lot of different ideas and like cliches and ideas about like, what a hero is complicated. Douglas's situation is complicated. What is the heroic decision to make,
Well, and it's so interesting when a filmmaker can challenge, because like there's always meta aspects of a film, and you cast a Kirk Douglas for a reason. Most films you cast a Kirk Douglas because he's going to be a hero. And like Spartacus is a lot more straightforward. Spartacus is a hero. And you want to root for him at the end. And you want to stand up and like, no, I'm Spartacus. Because you want to stand up with him. Here.
Oh, God.
Which some of my favorites, like thinking about like what Kubrick does, and you set this film up to defy expectations because you put a Douglas in this film because he's going to save the day. But he doesn't. And you have to process that as an audience member in 1957 of like, Kirk Douglas is our hero. Why didn't he save them? And it's the same kind of idea of why Sergio Leone wanted to have Henry Fonda in Once Upon a Time in the West and play a villain. Because who is Henry Fonda to filmgoers? He was like the most pure. This is the man who was that one juror in 12 Angry Men that did the right thing and stood up to the rest of the jurors. He's your hero in Grapes of Wrath. He's Henry Fonda. And then you have him all in black and kill a kid within the first scene that you see him. And you're just like, oh crap.
Damn.
And that sets up a whole different aspect. And I appreciate Kubrick, which that's the thing. A lot of Kubrick's films, well, I feel like I keep saying that. And then I think Kubrick didn't make that many films.
I know.
I think he, in the end, directed like 16 films. And because, like, obviously there was huge gaps of time, but like,
Right.
he does this multiple times because, like, you have a Jack Nicholson who you would expect to be your hero. And from the very start in The Shining, you know something's up. There's something off about this guy.
Sure. Yeah.
And Tom Cruise was like the most bankable star you can get in Eyes Wide Shut. And do we like Tom Cruise in Eyes Wide Shut? I don't like Tom Cruise and his character in Eyes Wide Shut, and I don't think you're supposed to. And like, it's interesting how he plays with that.
Yeah, sure.
Eyes Wide Shut is a very interesting film. I wish Matt was still here because he hated the fact that I had him watch that film. But I guess wrapping up, do either of you have any closing thoughts, final thoughts about Paths of Glory?
I mean, my I don't know if I have any closing thoughts other than I wonder, if it'd be good to look back at that time when it was released, because this is after World War II, way after World War I, and within 10 years of the start of Vietnam. So, Korea, and with America, I think the Korean War is going on at that time, and so you've got British people working on this, you've got American people working on this film. It's about France. So
French people?
Yeah, French people talking in English accents.
Or American accents.
Well, mostly American accents, really. Yeah. So it does make me wonder, what exactly were they trying to poke holes out at that time, late 50s? Because, you continue to see, some of this military activity, these sorts of things going on, as before and after, so it does make me, so it's not so much a conclusion as much as just the question.
We're going to leave that all out for all of you out there. You can comment. What do you think? How about you, James? Any last thoughts?
Sure. I'm glad we took this little trip because I wasn't well versed in Kubrick's films a couple of months ago. I think I have a much better idea of not just him as a person, because that's almost not as interesting as his work. His work is so much more interesting than just Kubrick. You know what I mean?
Totally.
But
unless you look at how much of a terrible human being he was when he was filming his films.
That's that's part. So I enjoy the cerebral quality of his work.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also a little confused between the Kubrick that we know, who is cold and used his actors like the soldiers in this film. And yet he's giving us this huge, grandiose parable about humanism, So there's a lot to chew on from beginning to end of Kubrick's, career. But yeah, I'm glad, again, as I was last time, I'm glad I had an excuse and a reason to watch this movie. And it's not going to be the last time.
Yeah.
So, I know I could speak for myself. Kubrick is one of my top 3 favorite directors. And I really enjoyed just going back and watching these films again. Because, I feel like I wind up falling into loving the filmmaking a lot. And you can definitely see the starting points of where Kubrick's starting to flex those filmmaking aesthetics that he uses throughout the rest of his career in this film. But this is definitely one, it shows just why it's like you have to marinate on a Kubrick film. There's a lot to think about, no matter which one it is, except like maybe not The Killing quite as much. But basically from this on, this maybe Spartacus, Lolita, Strained Love, and all the way up to Eyes Wide Shut, which, my God, that film. Just tons of things to think about. And I appreciate that about what Kubrick did as a director and as a writer. So I would definitely recommend you all go check out Paths of Glory. This is definitely his most manageable one to watch, though, because it is only 90 minutes.
Is there a good and has anybody seen any good documentaries out there on him?
I have not. Honestly, the only documentary that I know of that I can name that's based off of him or any of his works is Room 237, but that's a completely different thing because that's just nonstop documentary about conspiracy theories about The Shining.
Oh, okay.
So, like, it's not about him.
Sure. Yeah, well, I'm gonna look and see because I love watching documentaries on directors. So I might see if there's one out there. That'd be cool.
Yeah. This is probably my last thought. I've been asked, who would you like? I actually got asked on my show that I'm doing, Lost in the Wasteland, where I'm interviewing people about their film perspectives, and one of my guests asked me if I could interview anyone on that show, who would I want to interview? And I said, can they be living or dead? Because my response was Stanley Kubrick. And then at this point, there's some part of me that's like, do I want to see behind the curtain?
Yeah.
Never meet the heroes, man.
Well, because do I just want to leave him an enigma and just leave it at that? Because it's a lot more interesting that way.
Sure.
He is some kind of madman. But boy, did he make some great films. But this was a great time chatting about Paths of Glory. Maybe next time we could all stick around the whole time and figure that out. But